The growth and evolution of both businesses and humans isn't complicated. It's actually quite simple. Now, we often complicate it all because of some odd masochistic justification for achieving the benefits of growth, evolution, and scale. Let's uncomplicate all of that in this episode, shall we? Hey, it's Wei, and you're listening to the Limitless Leader Podcast, the podcast for powerfully ambitious entrepreneurs and leaders wanting to have limitless freedom to vision and focus on purposeful impact and growth. Okay, this episode might be a little long. Why? Because I'm going to share everything, our entire framework of how we actually help entrepreneurs and leaders scale up and out of the day-to-day of their businesses. Now, what do I mean by up and out? Well, you scale up the business upwards and grow the business. But more importantly, you take the entrepreneur, the owner, or the leader out of the day-to-day grind of the business. And why that's important is if this is something that you've explored and considered, and it's an important thing to point out, is that it gives the entrepreneur or the leader of the organization an opportunity to shift gears to a higher level of impact. If you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur, think about it, right? We became entrepreneurs for more than just paying the taxes, paying the bills, paying the overhead, running the operations of the business. Now, for some of us, that really lights us up. And so I'm not going to take that away from any entrepreneur leader that thrives in the day-to-day grind and operation. But if you are the original visionary of the organization, you had a greater vision of why you started the business, if the business is one that you started, then you may want to sit back and think about, okay, maybe I've been a little bit burnt out from even thinking about why I started this business to begin with. So if you are indeed looking to scale up and out of your business, if you've been trying, or you've thought about it, but you were always hesitant about doing it, not because you didn't want to, but maybe because you didn't feel confident that you could, then this is our framework of how we do it consistently over the last couple of decades to help our clients do that. So you might want to take some notes. Okay, it's very high level, but it's still very actionable. Okay, so you will get results if you apply these things. And the beautiful thing about this framework is that every time you want to scale to a new level, like we have clients that only want to scale 50% out of their business. They don't want to be completely out. But then like a year or so down the road, they say, well, actually, I want to be 75% out of the business. Okay, just run the same framework again and to make sure that you can make it happen. The framework is important. The way we do this is because there is a yo-yo effect that a lot of people experience who don't use the framework that we use. And so what they do is they pump a bunch of sales into an organization. They have a high influx of capital that comes through, and then they scale themselves out. But then something breaks or something happens when they remove themselves from the equation. And like a bad mafia, it sucks the entrepreneur, sucks the leader right back into the trenches. And so the way this framework works is is that it mitigates that. And and we were able to, it's not like we always knew this framework. It was due to ourselves experiencing the same thing with our own growth, as well as the yo-yo effect we were experiencing with our clients we were trying to scale many, many, many moons ago. Okay. So every time you want to scale, just rinse and repeat and do this framework. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So it doesn't take hours and hours and hours because, like I said, this is high level, but there's 3 basic phases. Okay. And I'll start with the naming of the phases, and the names may shift and change depending on the circumstances, but for the most part, the names are pretty consistent. Okay. If you're taking notes, then you might want to write this down. Phase 1 is called scaling foundations. Critically important. And it's on phase one for a reason. We never, ever let our clients skip phase one. It's not the sexiest, it's not the most exciting phase, but without doing that, you inevitably will end up kind of experiencing that yo-yo effect. Phase one was developed to eliminate that yo-yo effect so you can sustainably scale, right? So you can scale up and out and then stay out. Phase two is called acceleration. Okay, this is where our patented human performance metric technology really comes into play, and I'll explain how that all works. Then, after you achieve some momentum, phase three, we like to call it orchestrate. This is where the artistry of what our framework can do to customize, essentially create a custom culture that is highly adaptable to the changes in the marketplace, the changes in the business. If you add more people or you take away people from the business, this phase is what creates a high level of adaptability and malleability, if you will. Okay. So the question people often say, well, where does your patented technology come in? Well, this framework is not unusual or so unique. I'm sure a lot of people do it. What separates us is the fact that our technology is kind of like a shortcut. It's a turbo drive. It's an accelerant. What normally would take other people months and years to do this framework, our technology facilitates that sometimes in as short as a month, in a fraction of the time. We like to call it that our patented technology eliminates the stress of guess. In other words, we take the guesswork out of how we optimize the unique combination of human beings, including yourself as a leader, in the whole entire organization. Okay, so now we're 7 minutes into the or so into the episode, and I have yet to jump in. So without further ado, I mean, the framing has been set up. You understand the value of this. Let's jump into phase number one, which is scaling foundations. Okay. One of the first things that we do is an exercise called sustainable scaling exercise. And what that exercise does, it shifts the subconscious blocks that have kept, I mean, if you ever tried to scale, you'll appreciate this piece. Oftentimes, people will want to scale to get away from a painful situation. Like they're burning out, or they've been in the trenches for too long, or they know that them being inside operations or the day-to-day grind or the day-to-day operations is becoming a bottleneck, okay? Or as we like to call the golden handcuffs of team babysitting that oftentimes entrepreneurs and leaders who care about their people go through. So the sustainable scaling exercise basically elicits all the reasons why you want to scale, starting with the away motivators. In other words, the pain points, okay? Here's the thing about the pain points. If you listen to the last episode, the pain points are only good enough to get us to a certain point, because after you scale away from the pain point long enough, the pain goes away. But if you don't have an ability to shift gears to a different type of motivation, you'll go back into the trenches to experience that. That's just how the human genome works. Without a certain level of impetus or motivation, we just become complacent. And it's just normal. It's just nature of things, right? And so the sustainable scaling exercise helps elicit all the painful reasons why you want to scale, but it also helps you list out all the positive, forward motivating reasons why you want to scale. Both are really important. It's like yin and yang. A lot of people say, oh, don't talk about the negativity. But guess what? It's the painful motivators that get us to move. But what keeps us on cruise control or continuous growth moving forward is the carrot, as one would get the donkey to move, right? It's the reason why you want to scale. So for example, let's say, for example, burnout is the reason why someone wants to scale out of the business because they're just done doing the day-to-day stuff. Once they get out, right, and they're no longer doing the day-to-day, what's going to keep them going? We had a client that basically we had to shift and make sure that they get clear on, oh, I want to scale out so I can focus on building new partnerships for mergers and acquisitions, and also to scale up the business, right? Because they were at a place right now where they became a kind of like a thought leader in their space. And so it was almost a necessity for them to be available, to be able to be out there to attract what they need to attract. And so that was kind of something that came really clear. But in the beginning, how it was defined, it was like, I just need to be out there. Okay, so the sustainable scaling exercises forces you to not only elicit the negative motivators, but also to list out more positive motivators than negative motivators. So you have a variety of reasons to shift into that higher gear, but also the level of clarity. So that exercise takes you through that. The next part, after that's elicited, of this phase 1 piece, it's what we call we run the scale stress test, okay? The scaling structure stress test. And what this test does, it tests the structure of your business to see if it is able to handle your monetary and your time freedom goals of scaling out of the business, right? This was a huge discovery on our part. When we incorporated this, literally all that yo-yo experiences we had with clients before went away. And what we focused on was on what we call the easy 3, okay? Every organization has this. You have an acquisitions component, you have a fulfillment component, and you have an operations component. I don't care what kind of business you have, there's always acquisitions, getting the business, fulfillment, delivering on the business to the customer or client, and operations keeps the organization going. So we want to make sure these 3 main pillars of the business can handle the stress of the new of your goals of scaling. So that means that when you run this test, you basically future pace. We like to use $100K a month. If you take $100K a month of business and you drizzle it down all these 3 pillars of operations, fulfillment, and acquisitions, right? And see if it breaks. Run the scenarios, see if it breaks. We have a whole training around that we do. And if you want access to that, we'll leave links in the description of this episode so that you can reach out to us and we can have a conversation. What that scaling structure stress test reveals oftentimes are the gaps that have prevented most entrepreneurs and leaders from scaling in the past. And so then the next step after that, we have to put spackle on it, right? We have to cover up those gaps. And it's really simple. We either cover up the gaps with either technology, which is actually cheaper, or with people, okay? Or a hybrid of both. Okay, and there's a whole section on that piece as well. Once we get those gaps spackled, okay, the scaling gaps spackled, then the last step of phase 1 is basically establishing the KPIs of scale. So many people scale with too large of a figure, and then they get off track because they don't have the stepping stones in between. They don't have the milestones in between, and that's what those KPIs of scale are really there for. I go through a lot more in phase 1. I spend a lot of time in phase 1 because phase 1 is the foundation. Like it says, it's a scaling foundation. If the foundation is not built properly, there's a ripple effect. There is a compound effect that happens if you prematurely go into phase 2 and phase 3. The beautiful thing about phase 1 is, more often than not, when we have clients start going through phase 1, just doing phase 1 alone, they already start to experience results. They already start to free up more of their time. They start to see the gaps and they start to be able to eliminate things out of their day. And the byproduct of that, they end up empowering their groups simply by doing so. And we often see sales go up already. Okay, so that's phase 1. Once phase 1 is set, then we go to phase 2, which is all about what we call acceleration. And it's really simple. This is where our technology comes in, identifies the self-optimization blueprints of every human being inside the organization, inside the teams, in every pillar of the Easy 3. And what we do is we basically break down the 3-part workday. Okay, what does that look like? The core levers that live within each part of that workday, the amount of energy pool that each human being has to work with. And what we do is we create a unique, high-performance blueprint for every human being, and we spend the time in phase two to just basically get them used to running that highly optimized, sustainable work model. What makes this difficult and what separates this from everything else is that there's no two human beings that are alike. So this, because of our technology, we're able to very quickly and very easily, I mean, usually it's within like an hour, elicit their self-optimization blueprint. The reason why it takes time, because sometimes it disrupts the old way of doing things and we're just breaking habits. But as we're breaking these habits, there's very significant gains in results that we can see across the board, not just for the leader or the owner, but also in the quality of the workspace, the results, and just basically overall satisfaction and happiness, which of course contributes to morale, which increases productivity and performance of the organization as a whole. Now, what happens is at phase two, we stay there for a while, phase one, phase two, and we go back and forth actually. We use phase one, the information from phase one, to calibrate on phase two and do some optimization to make sure that we keep accelerating until we get momentum. Typically, until there's 30 to 50% validation of the KPIs. We use this, so it's very measured, right? 30 to 50% of the KPIs of scale. Once we hit anywhere from 30 to 50%, I like to hit 50%, but you can actually hit 30%. So for example, if your KPI is one of them, it says we need to hit 100K a month, at the 30,000 mark, a lot of people can start shifting to phase three. I like to wait to 50%, so we have maximum momentum, minimal amount of kind of like, mistakes or deviations, right? But once you hit the 30 to 50% KPI validation, then you go to phase three, which is all about orchestration. Now, this is where we take the self-optimization blueprints. By now, all the team members have an understanding of how they uniquely show up in the world and how they can start to interact with each other with a better, higher level of understanding of how best to work with each other. Phase three is then now about, okay, let's optimize the dynamics between the team members. The best way to describe this is kind of is kind of like an orchestra. That's why we call it orchestrate. When I was younger, I used to play in an orchestra, and every year, the conductor, Dr. Jakey, the late Dr. Jakey, he passed away on the third year I was in the organization. Kind of sad, but he was kind of brilliant, and when I didn't realize it till much later in life when I reflected back on my experience there. But there was something that he did every year, because every year we would have new players come in for different instruments across the board. And every year we would lose players, right? There would always be this early part of every year, it's almost like indoctrination of the group. And people would just sit where they're used to sitting, and we would play some songs. At some point, he would stop conducting, tell us to keep playing, and he would close his eyes and he would listen. And he would listen up to a certain point, and back when I was younger, I had no idea what he was doing. Now I do, because what he was doing, he was listening to the sound. The unique sound of the unique combination of instruments and players that year. And at some point, he would just stop, and then he would open his eyes and point to different parts of the orchestra, to different people, telling them where to go, where to move, and so on and so forth. It was frustrating for some because sometimes they thought, oh, I worked myself up to the higher seats of this section, and now I'm being pushed back. But what he was really doing is he was fine-tuning the sound to create the best sound possible from the unique combination of the change in the dynamics of the players and the instruments that were now in this year's orchestra. And then he would do that over and over again until he got to a point where where he thought was the sweet spot. Us sitting inside the pit, and we wouldn't know, but looking back, we were one of the most popular orchestras in the area, and I never understood why when I went to listen to a peer group of another orchestra that playing the same song that we played, that something just sounded not the same, right? And so when I realized that's what he was doing, I realized that's a lot what we do and what we help our clients do, because every unique combination of human being requires a custom culture. And historically, that's been really difficult to do because there were no metrics. Everything would have been kind of like what we call the stress of guests, and it would be trial and error. And who has the time for that when you've got all these other things to take care of in the business? But now, because of our technology, we can create very precise data of every single human being. What normally would take years, sometimes would only take days for us to do. And then the fine-tuning pieces, we can create custom conflict resolutions between the two different people. What we've done, we had a client who they had some conflict resolution issues, and they were hiring all these people to handle the conflict resolution issues. And finally, when we came in, we said, you're using these out-of-the-box cookie-cutter solutions for conflict resolution, but you've got unique people here. Everybody's different. And the conflict of one person, the type of conflict that one person would have with another person is going to be very different from that same person with another human being in the group, because it's kind of like, how different things mix differently. If you remember from chemistry and everything like that, certain elements and certain liquids and gases mix together and some don't. It's like oil and water, but then oil with another oil works better. Same concept here. And so in phase 3 is when we get to the nuances of the unique nature. What we're orchestrating here is a custom culture that is highly adaptable to changes in the ecosystem within the organization. And this is where the artistry of the work that we do comes in. So there is no cookie cutter way to do it. And that's why we want to make sure there's enough momentum to scale so that it can really take the time in phase 3 to do that. Once that's locked in, however, typically we surpass the goals of revenue and time freedom that our client was looking for. And that's it. It might seem like there's a lot, but I get all excited talking about it, but hopefully you got a picture of this. Now, if you want a worksheet or some of our access to some of our free trainings around how to do, especially phase 1, I'm telling you, phase 1 alone, okay, is game changing for every organization or every entrepreneur that wants to scale up and out of their business. Make sure you check the links in our description and reach out and let's just have a conversation. And then I can give you the links and the trainings that you can immediately use to start to change the landscape of your business so that scaling up and out stops becoming a pipe dream and becomes a reality. Hopefully you found this helpful and you enjoyed this episode and you found the content to be valuable. Like I said, we're going to be doing more of these and breaking it down, but I at least wanted to give you an entire overview of our entire framework and exactly what we do, rinse and repeat, for all of our clients to help them scale up and out without sacrificing growth and revenue. Okay. Now, if there's something that we talked about that you want to dive deeper, just again, check the links below. Okay. And see how we can help you kind of expedite that process of, scaling away from the daily grind. You can also visit us at limitlessleader.co, or you can find us on Facebook or LinkedIn to connect with us, or you can email team@limitlessleader.co. I know there's a lot, but it's all in the description below. Make sure to mention the episode that most inspired you so we have a little context of, what to talk about with you to be as efficient as possible. But until next time, keep striving onward and upward for the limitless possibilities that lie within you.